Okay, welcome people. So hopefully you had a chance to log into Canvas and you see that we have our second unit there. If you've done everything in unit 1, then it might be a good idea for you to collapse your first unit. That way it's not taking up space. And it'll be easier for you to scroll down into unit 2. So today is the first day of our second unit. Our second unit is all about cells. And today we're going to specifically talk about organelles. So if we think about cells as being like our bodies, then the organelles are like the organs of the cell. Just like your brain is an organ inside of your body, the cell has something else that functions similarly to a brain. Just like your muscles give your body the ability to move, the cell has an organelle that does the same thing. So we're going to talk about some of those organelles today. By the end of the day, you should be able to describe the structure and function of eukaryotic organelles. So that word eukaryotic is a big word. It's hard to pronounce. It's one that you may never have heard before, but we are going to discuss it in greater detail tomorrow. But today we're talking specifically about eukaryotic cells and their organelles. And then the question that we're going to be hoping to answer by the end of the lesson and as we go throughout the lesson, why is it important that each organelle has its own unique function? So you'll be thinking about that. And as you take your notes, you should be trying to organize your notes in a way that allows you to answer that question. So go ahead and take your notes out at this point if you don't already have them out. We're going to go ahead and start. Okay. So in biology, cells are the smallest things that we study. They are the smallest living unit of life. In chemistry, we can actually study something even smaller than that. We can study atoms. And even smaller than that, we can study protons and electrons. But in biology, we focus on the cell because the cell is the smallest living thing. And a cell's purpose is to create proteins. So sometimes you may hear us refer to cells as protein factories. So to get a better idea of just how small cells are, I want to look at this illustration. So here we're talking about Times regular 12-point font. So if you type a paper for your English class, more than likely you have to type it in 12-point font, so you know what size that is. It's not very big at all. In fact, I've got a paper here. You can see that word right there, mentoring. That's 12-point font. Okay, so it's pretty small. But of course, we have things that we can still see with our naked eye that are smaller than even the words on your paper. For example, a coffee bean. Now we're talking about something that is millimeters small. That's pretty small. If I take this meter stick, I would need to cut it into 1,000 pieces in order to create just 1 millimeter. Okay, so it's very, very small. But we can even go smaller than that. I've got a grain of salt, which is half a millimeter in diameter. So very, very small. It'd be hard for you to even pick up a single grain of salt. But we can go smaller than that. Now we're no longer looking at millimeters. We're actually looking at micrometers. Okay, so 1 micrometer is you would need 1,000 micrometers to create 1 millimeter, and you need 1,000 millimeters to create 1 meter. So a micrometer is very, very small. In fact, I would need to take this meter stick and cut it into 1 million equal pieces to create a micrometer. So these things are very, very small. You've got an amoeba. Now we're starting to get into the size of a cell. We've got a human egg cell, which is actually pretty big. It's 130 micrometers. But then we've also got a skin cell, which is only 30 micrometers, so that's smaller. On the right, you see a photoreceptor, which is a cell that's in the back of your eye, which allows you to process light. You got a sperm cell right there, so you can see that sperm cells are much, much smaller than eggs. Go figure. There's a red blood cell. There's a chromosome. We talked about chromosomes a little bit in our first unit, and we're going to talk about them more as we get into Unit 5. But the chromosome is essentially where your DNA is tightly wound and it's organized in a specific way. Now we've got a mitochondria as well as a lysosome. Both of these are different parts of a cell. So these would go inside of most of the other cells that we just talked about. But we can go even smaller than that. So you see a lysosome is only 1 micrometer in diameter. So very, very small. You cannot see this with the naked eye. You can't even really see this with most microscopes. You need pretty sophisticated microscopes to see these things. But we can go smaller than that. We can look at the virus that causes measles, which is 220 nanometers in size. So I would need to divide my meter stick into 1 billion equally sized slivers in order to be the size of this measles virus. But then there's the virus that causes the flu, which is 130 nanometers. Notice something is that they look like the coronavirus. They all have this protein covering on the outside that looks like spikes. There's the human immunodeficiency virus, the virus that causes AIDS, HIV right there. Hepatitis. Now these things are extremely, extremely small. We're going to talk about ribosomes today. They are a very important cellular organelle. Hemoglobin is the protein in your blood that allows you to carry oxygen. Okay, there's a phospholipid. You've heard of phospholipids before. There's glucose, 900 picometers, PM, picometer. That's very, very small. And there's the carbon atom, 340 picometers. Okay, so we can go smaller than that, but these are things that you cannot see with microscopes. We were theorizing about what these look like essentially. Okay, so in terms of general scale, the cells that we'll talk about in this class are actually pretty big. They're small. You can't see them with the naked eye, but they're visible with a microscope. Okay, so you can actually go much, much smaller than that, but you need to rely on pretty sophisticated, what are called the electron microscopes in order to do that. All right, so not common. I'll go back to the slides now. So there are 3 important parts of what we call cell theory. Number 1, all living things are made of cells, and the number of cells could vary, and it does vary widely. Some living things are literally just 1 cell. But then our bodies are made up of trillions of cells. Not millions, not billions, but trillions of cells. We also need to think about the fact that, as point 2 says, cells are the basic unit of structure and function. So we cannot forget that structure determines function. In fact, I'll type that into the chat. Please make sure that you are taking accurate and strong notes. All of our assessments, while we are virtual, will be open notes. So if you have strong notes, you should do very, very well in this class. But structure determines function. What this means is that the shape of a cell and what is inside of a cell will determine what that cell is able to do. It will determine that cell's job. And then lastly, point number 3 says, new cells come from existing cells, which means that life comes from life. So the cells that are in your body have been produced by previous cells that at this point have probably died. Now, maybe you've known someone who had cancer. Unfortunately, cancer is oftentimes a very fatal disease that results when the cells just don't when they're supposed to. So it's a natural process for your cells to die after they have reproduced a number of times. But in the case of cancer, the cells just don't die. They just keep reproducing, and they reproduce rapidly. And so what ends up happening is a tumor grows, and that can obviously have very profound impacts on the body and on your overall physical health, depending on where they are. Okay. So life comes from life. Living things produce other living things. You might be wondering, if that's true, then where did the first life come from? That's something that we'll have to discuss later in the course. And maybe you also have some thoughts about that already, depending on what your science background is, and also maybe depending on what your personal beliefs are. Okay. We've seen this image before, so I don't need you to write all of this down. What we need to focus on is this last purple box at the bottom. Like I said before we started the lecture, our bodies have organs inside of them that do specific things for our bodies. Organelles are like the organs of the cell. In fact, organelle just means little organ. So these are the parts of the cell that carry out jobs for the cell. We have different types that do different jobs. Okay. So this video is going to look like it's from another planet, but this is actually an artist's rendition of what happens inside of a cell and what that probably looks like. Okay, so a lot happened in that video, but essentially what we were seeing was the construction of different proteins as well as the breakdown of different proteins. And then we also saw things moving in and out of the cell, and we saw different organelles doing their jobs. Of course, like I said, inside of the human body, we have over 3 trillion cells. So what this means is that all of those processes that you just watched are happening inside of your body on a regular basis. So now I want to know if you remember any of the organelles that are a part of an animal cell from middle school. Can anybody tell me any organelles that they recognize here?
Nucleus.
Which one is the nucleus, Brian?
The big ball in the middle, like the little ball.
Okay.
Vesicles.
Good. Do you know where the vesicles are?
No, I just know one of them.
Okay. There's not really, I don't see a line pointing to any vesicles, so I'll just put it here. Anybody else know of any other?
Cell wall.
Okay, so that's another one that I'll put up here because the cell wall is only in plants, but this is an animal cell. But that's good that you know that too.
Mitochondria.
Do you know which one the mitochondria is?
I think it's the one by the nucleus, not the purple one, the other one.
This red thing?
Yep.
Okay, now I can see why you think that, but it's actually this yellow thing down here. And the reason why it looks like that is because they both have those folds. So that was a good guess. Anything else?
Cell membrane.
Good.
I don't know if it's up there, but the vacuole.
Good. Okay, you guys know a lot. Any others?
Ribosomes.
Excellent. Okay, we've got a lot of, I'm going to put that here. Let's see. Anything else?
Cytoplasm.
Good.
Hey, is there a chloroplast in an animal cell or no?
No, that's a good question. So only plant cells have chloroplasts. That's another one we'll talk about. Okay, I think this is a strong start. In fact, the other things that are a part of this,
That one.
the other things that are a part of this diagram, we won't really talk too much about in this class. So you guys you do have the basics down. So that's good.
That one, Mr. Rudd.
What'd you say?
I got one.
What else?
The endoplasmic. It's the endoplasmic one. That's the other one that I was pointing out that I had
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah. Good. Good. All right, so we actually have some pretty high level stuff here that we don't talk too much about in biology. The endoplasmic reticulum, we don't talk too much about. The others we do talk more about. Vesicles we don't talk too much about, but they do come up a little bit. So this is a good job, good starting list. I'm impressed. All right, I'll go back to the slides. So we'll have a slide on probably, I think, like 9 or 10 of them. So as stated, the cell wall only appears in plant cells. So only plants have cell walls. Animals do not have cell walls. Bacteria do not have cell walls. The cell wall is a rigid outer layer. It's like a brick wall that surrounds the plant cell, and it provides support and protection. And the cell wall is made of cellulose. Can someone tell me which of our 4 biological compounds cellulose must be? No guesses. We only have 4. You have a 25% chance of getting it right. You know nothing.
Is it one of the sugars?
Mm-hmm. Good, yeah. So cellulose is a sugar, meaning it's a carbohydrate. All right, so I'm going to guess that Makaran knew that because it ends in OSE. Is that right, Makaran?
Yeah, that's how I knew.
Good. So when the word ends in OSE, that means that it is a sugar, and that means that it is a carbohydrate. All right. So again, this is part of being a good student. You got to pick up on patterns and habits. And so this is a pattern that is very common. You see that OSE ending, it means a sugar. All right. The cell membrane can also be called the plasma membrane. So both of those words can be used, cell or plasma membrane, same thing. And we should also recognize this word, phospholipid, because that was an example of a lipid. So the cell membrane is made up of a phospholipid bilayer. So if you see here, I've got orange balls on the bottom and orange balls on the top. And those orange balls are connected to fatty acids, which are facing inward. So that's why we call it a bilayer, because we've got a layer here on top and then a layer on the bottom, and they face each other. 2 layers, bilayer. And the job of the cell membrane is to control what can come in and what can go out of the cell. And all cells have a cell membrane. Okay. The nucleus. This is one that most people remember, I'm sure. The nucleus is the control center of eukaryotic cells. So we're going to talk more tomorrow about the difference between eukaryotic and prokaryotic. But for now, just think of eukaryotic as cells, plants and animals. So the cells of both plants and animals have a nucleus. And inside of the nucleus is where you can find that cell's DNA, or that organism's DNA. And the DNA is found in the form of chromosomes. Humans have 46 chromosomes. We get 23 from our father and 23 from our mother, giving us a total of 46. Now, there are some conditions in which people have more or less than that, but on average, most human beings have 46 chromosomes.
How can you tell if someone's missing chromosomes?
How can you tell what?
If they're missing chromosomes.
Okay. I will show you. Okay. So this is called a karyotype. And what it means is it's basically a map of the chromosomes inside of the nucleus of someone's cell. So this is somebody's DNA. As you can see, we have pairs of chromosomes, and we should have 23 pairs. The first pair is my longest set. It's my longest pair of chromosomes, and then they get smaller and smaller as you go. The last pair is what determines your sex at birth. So this person is a male because they have an X and a Y. People who are born female have two X chromosomes. In this case, you can see that on the 21st, we have 3 chromosomes instead of 2. So that's a problem. This is a condition called trisomy 21. Tri meaning 3, and 21 meaning it's in the 21st position. So trisomy 21. This is more commonly known as Down syndrome. So people who have Down syndrome, instead of having 2 chromosomes on the 21st position, they have 3. And there are other conditions like that. There's trisomy 18, trisomy 13, and then there are some conditions in which you could be missing, but it's more, you could be missing a chromosome, but it's more likely that you have an extra one. And the reasons for that we'll talk more about later in the course. But that was a good question, Sean. Okay. So which of our 4 organic compounds is DNA an example of? This should be a pretty easy question. Which of our 4 organic compounds is DNA an example of?
Protein?
No, sir, not proteins.
Acid.
It's a nucleic acid. Yeah. So that is something that we should all know at this point. So please make sure that if you're still a little bit confused about that, that you are reviewing your Unit 1 notes. So nucleic, of course, DNA, the NA stands for nucleic acid. So DNA is an example, typing it into the chat, of nucleic acid. Definitely want to make sure that you all know that like it's the back of your hand or whatever else you know really well. Know it like you know, I don't know, something that you know really well. Okay, ribosomes. This is where we make our proteins. So another important part of being a good student is not necessarily how smart you are. It's about how much you can finesse. How easy can you make things on yourself? And one way that you can make things easier on yourself is by establishing analogies. That way you don't have to memorize everything. You can just associate specific information with things that you do know well. For example, you know ribs, and you know that ribs have protein in them. So we can be thinking about ribosomes, RIB, ribosomes, as also being associated with protein. Okay, so just small analogies like that. And it doesn't have to be something that anybody else understands. All it has to be is something that you understand and something that makes it easier on yourself. Ribosomes are extremely small, but this is where our cells make protein. So they are probably, next to the nucleus, the most important organelle. Okay. Then here's another very important organelle that you've probably heard of before, mitochondria. Somebody did tell me, somebody knew what it was. So mitochondria are very important because they provide our cells with energy. They take glucose from the foods that we eat, in the case of animals, and convert that into usable energy. Please make sure that you are writing this down. ATP. Cellular energy is known as ATP. Well into adulthood, people still remember that the mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. Don't know why, but that just sticks with people. So hopefully it sticks with you. Mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. Okay. Chloroplast, these are another organelle that only appear in plant cells. And the reason for that is that chloroplasts are the location of photosynthesis. So animals do not need to do photosynthesis because we eat food. That's how we get our glucose. But plants do not eat. So they need to make their own food. And this is why they're called autotrophs. Auto meaning self. So they make their own food. And the way they're able to do this is by using sunlight, by using carbon dioxide, and by using water to create the glucose. We'll talk about that in much greater detail in Unit 4. Chloroplasts are filled with a pigment called chlorophyll, and this chlorophyll pigment allows plants to capture the sunlight. And so this is actually what gives plants their green color. When you see a color, it's because the light is reflecting that color. All other colors are being absorbed. So my blue shirt is reflecting the color blue, and the color red, the color orange, the color green are being absorbed by the fibers in my shirt. So when you're able to see a color, it's because all other colors are being absorbed, and that's the one color that's being reflected. So in the case of plants, they absorb most of the visible light that they get from sunlight, and they reflect the green color. There is a reason for that, but I won't get into it. Okay. We also have a vacuole. vacuole. We can think of this like a vacuum. So if you're vacuuming a carpet or if you're vacuuming a floor, it will pull all the things from the floor into this suction storage bag. And that's what a vacuole is. It's basically a storage bag. It can store nutrients, it can store water, it can store waste. So vacuoles are very important, especially in plant cells. So if we can see in this image on the right side, the vacuole inside of a plant cell is very large, whereas the vacuole inside of an animal cell is smaller. Can anybody think about a reason why that would be true? Why do plant cells need a larger vacuole? Any thoughts on that? Why do plant cells need a larger vacuole?
So they can hold more water.
Exactly. Thank you, Makaran. So plants need to be able to store a large amount of water. That way, if they don't get water for a couple days, they are still good. They won't die. Additionally, they rely on water to give them their structure. So if you've ever owned a plant, then you've noticed that after a few days, if you haven't watered that plant, then that plant starts to droop. And the reason for that is because plants rely on water to maintain their upright structure. If they start to run out of water, then they have no way of maintaining that structure. Okay. I think this is the last one, yeah. So cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is not like the other organelles because it's not surrounded by its own membrane. The cytoplasm is basically the substance that all the other organelles swim around in. So it's not quite water. It is mostly water, but it's not quite water because it also has other things inside of it, like some sugars and other polar substances. And so because it has those other things in it, it is more jelly-like. It's not water. So imagine trying to swim through jelly. You could do it. It would just take you a much longer period of time. And so that's why cytoplasm is the way it is, because plants want their organelles to be able to move. They want them to be able to swim through the jelly, but they don't want them to do it constantly. Sometimes you do just need to be more still. So cytoplasm is the jelly-like fluid within the cell. And this is where all the other organelles swim around. Okay. So like I said, organelles need to be able to move around so that they can communicate with each other. The ribosomes need to be able to communicate with the Golgi apparatus, which needs to communicate with the nucleus, which needs to communicate with the centrioles, and so on and so forth. So they're all talking to each other, and doing that requires movement. The reason they talk together and they talk to each other is so that they can achieve the overall goal of the cell. So different cells have different goals. Okay. All right, practice question. Which organelle is commonly referred to as the control center and why? Is it A, the mitochondria because it supplies all of the energy for the cell? B, the chloroplast because it provides the food for the cell? C, the nucleus because it stores the DNA and contains genetic information? Or D, the ribosomes because they are responsible for the creation of proteins?
The nucleus.
Good. The nucleus is the control center of the cell. Okay, it has all the instructions. It has all the instruction manuals. So things only get made when the DNA says that they need to get made. When the nucleus says that they need to get made. Okay. All right, so we're at the end of the synchronous portion of class. We have 26 minutes left. If I want those of you who weren't able to do the quiz yesterday to try and see if you can do it. If not, then I still need to work to provide a backup option. But there are 2 assignments in Canvas under Unit 2, Day 1, in addition to the exit ticket. I would start with the Amoeba Sisters video because it's pretty easy. But you could also do the cell analogy reading and questions, whichever order you prefer. But those of you who have not done the quiz yet, please try to do your quiz.
You're talking about the quiz from yesterday?
Yes, the quiz from yesterday. If you weren't able to do it, but it looks like Nick just told me that it's still not working. So don't worry about that right now. Tomorrow I'll have another option for you all to take that quiz. Yeah, you can do the exit ticket and then the two other assignments as well. I would start with the Amoeba Sisters video, or you could start with the exit ticket, whatever your choice is. But those two other assignments are important too.
Okay.
Hey, Mr. Rudd, I'm about to send you an email.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, folks, it is 1:20. So at this time, third block is over. Please let me know if you need any additional help with anything, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Please have a great day.
Vamos, right?
All right.
See you. Have a good day.